The morning Brenda Kilpatrick decided to set fire to my great-grandfather's corn barn. She couldn't have guessed she'd soon be facing federal Judge Thaddeus Brennan, the same man who'd sentenced the entire Riverside County Commission to a collective 23 years behind bars. Now it's 5:47 a.m., and I'm standing among the wreckage, my boots grinding through layers of scorched wood and twisted iron that still radiate the night's heat. The air is thick with a bitter mix of burned oak, century-old corn dust, and diesel fumes so heavy it clings to your tongue like ash. Brenda thought she was erasing an eyesore, something she believed was dragging down her property values. What she really did was hand me the cleanest federal case I'd ever seen, one that would take her down and expose the entire web of corruption she'd been feeding for years. The smiling face of an HOA president hid a fatal miscalculation. She'd Googled retired judge, assumed I was some harmless old man, and never thought to learn my actual background tearing apart corrupt officials who twisted power for profit. So tell me this, what would you do if your HOA president torched the barn your great-grandfather built with his own hands that once earned a Purple Heart? Let me know where you're watching from, because I'd wager half of you have a Brenda wreaking havoc in your neighborhood right now. My name's Thaddeus Brennan, and 3 years ago I thought I'd left the business of sending people to prison behind me. 27 years on the federal bench teaches you to smell corruption long before you see it. After losing my wife, Margaret, to cancer, I'd planned to retire quietly on the 47 acres my grandfather, Seamus Brennan, left me out in Millfield County, Iowa. Seamus came over from County Cork in 1948 with nothing but shrapnel in his leg and a carpenter's hands that could build things meant to last forever. He raised that corn barn in 1952, every beam carved from Iowa oak, every joint fitted so precisely you couldn't slip a dime through. 70 years later, those weathered boards still carried the sweet scent of dried corn, his pipe tobacco, and that distinct aroma of old timber that had survived more than half a century of brutal Iowa winters. When I moved back, I figured retirement would mean restoring old tractors, planting corn, and enjoying the kind of deep silence you only find when your nearest neighbor lives a quarter-mile away. What I didn't expect was that the next quarter-mile would be crammed full of 847 identical McMansions. Millfield estates ruled by a woman who could give Machiavelli lessons in control. Brenda Kilpatrick didn't just run that HOA, she reigned over it. Picture 5'6" of razor-edged authority wrapped in designer suits that probably cost more than most people's rent. She carried that ever-present clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. Her immaculate white Mercedes matched her bleached smile, and when her heels hit the pavement, they clicked like a countdown timer. Tick, tick, tick. She had turned suburban uniformity into a weapon. Selling real estate was her game, pushing those identical houses to young families too distracted to notice the fine print about what their HOA could dictate. Her husband, Randy, owned the biggest construction outfit in the county, which gave them more pullover permits than the actual commissioners. Watching them was like witnessing a royal court, except their castle was a strip mall office plastered with motivational posters about community values. Here's the best part of the story. My land sat right in the center of her empire, but completely beyond her control. Seamus had secured agricultural exemptions and mineral rights decades ago, before anyone had even coined the term homeowners association. Legally, Brenda had no more power over my property than she did over the moon. And fortunately for her, no one ever bothered to teach the self-proclaimed queen of the suburbs about property law. Her first royal inspection came one crisp September morning while I was elbow-deep in my grandfather's old John Deere, trying to coax the engine back to life. That familiar rumble of diesel always took me back to being 12, when Seamus's calloused hands guided mine on the steering wheel. I was wiping motor oil off my fingers when I heard the sharp staccato of heels striking my gravel driveway like incoming artillery. "Mr. Brennan," she announced, her voice carrying that syrupy sweet tone only real estate agents master, honey laced with barbed wire. "I'm Brenda Kilpatrick, HOA president. We need to talk about your agricultural structures." She stood there in a pristine cream-colored suit, glaring at my freshly painted red barn as though it were a personal insult. The morning sun made those old walls glow like something out of American Gothic, a living piece of history that had fed families since Truman was in the White House. "Ma'am," I said, wiping my hands on a shop rag, I appreciate you stopping by, but that barn's been grandfathered in since long before your development was even a glimmer in a contractor's eye. Her smile tightened, her tone sharpening. Mr. Brennan, property values in our community rely on maintaining certain aesthetic standards. That structure is visible from 17 homes, and frankly, it's hurting everyone's investment. The tractor engine settled into a steady purr, and I could taste the first hint of autumn in the air, harvest season coming fast. I understand your concern, I told her evenly. But this is private agricultural land. Your HOA has absolutely zero jurisdiction here, and that's when her polished mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. Her eyes went flat and cold, like a shark's, and when she spoke again, her voice dropped to a low whisper that carried more danger than any federal sentence I'd ever delivered. Mr. Brennan, she murmured, there are creative ways to address issues that threaten our community's prosperity. I sincerely hope you won't make us consider them. The way she emphasized creative solutions made my old prosecutor instincts light up like sirens. Exactly 7 days later, Brenda's first creative solution arrived disguised as Dale Hoffman, Millfield County's code enforcement officer. He rolled up one Thursday morning in a battered county truck that looked like it had survived a war zone, gripping a clipboard so thick it could stop a bullet. Murdoch Brennan, he started, his voice cracking like a nervous teenager asking someone to prom. I have some complaints here, possible code violations on your property. I set down my coffee mug, the one that said I survived 27 years of federal court, and all I got was this lousy retirement, and walked over. Dale shifted his weight from foot to foot like a man in desperate need of a restroom. The chill of October mixed with the smell of his anxious sweat. The poor guy looked like he was attending his own execution. What kind of violations, Dale? I asked. He flipped through his paperwork, hands trembling like fall leaves in the wind. Well, there have been anonymous reports of noise issues, dust control problems, possible rodent concerns, improper equipment storage, septic irregularities, environmental hazards. His voice shrank with every word. I'd seen that look before, people caught in the middle of something they wanted no part of. How many complaints, Dale? 14, he blurted, the word landing like a death sentence. 14 anonymous complaints in 1 week against a farm that had been peacefully operating since Eisenhower was in the Oval Office. Dale's Adam's apple bobbed like it was trying to escape. Look, Judge, Mr. Brennan, he stammered. I know this smells worse than a hog barn in August, but I've got twin girls starting college next year, and certain folks with pullover county contracts made it clear that thorough enforcement in this area would be career-enhancing. The way he said thorough enforcement told me everything I needed to know. Who's leaning on you, Dale? He darted glances toward my cornfields like he expected snipers in the stalks, then pulled out his phone. She's not even hiding it anymore. He showed me a voicemail transcript. Dale, this is Brenda Kilpatrick. The Brennan situation requires immediate and comprehensive attention. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining community standards. Rice Company has several county projects coming up for bid, and we value cooperation from officials who understand priorities. She might as well have handed me a signed confession. My prosecutor brain roared to life like a cold engine catching on premium fuel. 27 years dismantling corruption networks teaches you to spot a shakedown when you see one, and this one was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Dale, I said, time for a little legal lesson. Ever heard of Iowa's Right to Farm Act? He blinked at me like a confused Labrador. Iowa Code Chapter 352, I continued. It protects farms that existed before surrounding developments. Specifically forbids local governments from using nuisance ordinances to harass pre-existing agricultural operations. I gestured toward the barn older than both of us put together. Every single one of those complaints falls under nuisance ordinances. Right to farm laws exist to shield farms like this from exactly this kind of harassment. If you're on rural land that predates nearby suburbs, look up your state's agricultural protection laws. They're usually bulletproof. Dale went pale as new snow. So you're saying these complaints are illegal? I'm saying whoever's feeding you this nonsense either doesn't know farm law or assumes you don't, I replied, snapping photos of his clipboard. Mind if I document this teachable moment? Jesus, Judge, if Brenda finds out I let you, my courtroom voice dropped like a gavel. I'm not your problem, Dale. But someone's using county authority to run a personal vendetta against protected farmland. And that makes you an accessory to misconduct, whether you like it or not. He looked like a man who'd just learned his winning lottery ticket was counterfeit. What the hell am I supposed to do? Easy, I said. Do your job honestly. File your report stating that every complaint concerns activities explicitly protected under Iowa agricultural exemptions. Take photos showing normal farm operations. Follow the law, not orders. So that's what he did. For 30 minutes, Dale dutifully photographed my perfectly ordinary barn tractor and grain bins. The morning light made everything look like a postcard from the heart of rural America because that's exactly what it was. But while Dale clicked away, I was building a federal case, one harassment report at a time, every misuse of county resources, every abuse of authority, every attempt to weaponize bureaucracy for personal gain. It was all going in a growing file. That evening, right on schedule, 8:47 p.m., my phone rang. Some people threatened with clockwork precision. Mr. Brennan, Brenda's voice hissed. Sharp enough to frost over hell. I understand you've been interfering with legitimate community enforcement activities. You almost had to respect her nerve, almost. Miss Kilpatrick, I said evenly, I've merely documented your ongoing misuse of public offices for personal harassment. She laughed, a brittle sound that could have shattered glass. Mr. Brennan, you clearly have trouble understanding how civilized communities operate. Difficult neighbors often find their problems multiplying exponentially. And there it was, another threat, delivered with the smug calm of someone who never once faced accountability. Miss Kilpatrick, I said, letting 3 decades of judicial gravity settle into my tone, you're about to learn that some problems have a way of becoming everyone else's solutions. The silence that followed was so sharp I could almost hear her brain recalculating her odds. 10 days later, Brenda's second creative solution arrived, this time in the form of a process server who looked like he'd rather be delivering poison. The lawsuit, filed in Millfield County District Court, demanded immediate demolition of my structurally unsafe agricultural facility and $50,000 in damages for loss of property value and emotional distress. I sat at my kitchen table, reading this fantasy novel disguised as a legal filing, while my coffee went cold, and I laughed until my ribs hurt. After nearly 3 decades of watching ridiculous cases cross my bench, this one took the crown. According to Brenda's lawyers, my 70-year-old barn was an imminent public hazard, attracting vermin, trespassers, and my personal favorite, potential terrorist concealment opportunities. Terrorists in an Iowa corn barn. You couldn't make this up if you tried. The letter had told me everything I needed to know. Hawthorne Sterling and Associates, a Des Moines powerhouse known for charging $800 an hour to help developers bulldoze small rural towns. This wasn't some bottom-shelf local lawyer chasing a quick payday. This was high-end legal artillery, the kind that costs more in a day than most people earn in a year. Someone was literally wagering the farm to eliminate my barn. When I started combing through county property records, what I uncovered made my blood pressure spike. Over the past year and a half, 3 different shell corporations had quietly bought up every agricultural parcel within a 2-mile radius of Millfield Estates. The listed purchasing agent on each deed, Kilpatrick Development Solutions, LLC, the registered address, the office of Rise Construction Company. They weren't cleaning up blight. They were constructing a real estate empire nearly 1,000 acres worth, and my 47-acre farm sat in the dead center like an immovable thorn. Time to bring in some federal-grade muscle. My former law clerk, Michael Chen, had become Chicago's most feared civil rights attorney, the kind of man whose name alone could make corrupt officials lose sleep. Judge Brennan, he said when he picked up, please tell me someone's been foolish enough to violate your constitutional rights. Michael, I replied. Someone's using county government to try to steal my land, and they just filed a lawsuit, so ridiculous it belongs on late-night TV. Within 72 hours, Michael had filed a motion to dismiss for lack of standing, followed by a federal countersuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, the kind that makes opposing counsel suddenly develop ulcers. Section 1983 removes immunity from government officials who abuse authority under color of law, holding them personally liable for damages, attorney fees included. In plain English, if you misuse public office for private profit, you can be sued as you, not as the county. But the real fireworks began when Agent Sarah Kowalski called me back. I was in the workshop swapping out spark plugs on the old John Deere when her voice came through the Bluetooth speaker, clear, cool, and all business, blending with the clink of metal and the smell of motor oil. "Judge," she said, "that HOA situation you mentioned. It just got bumped to federal priority. We've been tracking a coordinated land fraud operation across 6 Iowa counties. Rural property owners are being harassed into selling under pressure, usually to shell companies connected to local officials. Let me guess," I said, wiping grease off my hands with a shop rag older than some court clerks. "Their favorite targets are elderly farmers, veterans, and minorities." "Bullseye," Sarah replied. "Same playbook every time, anonymous complaints, bogus code violations, legal intimidation designed to force distress sales." Your Brenda Kilpatrick just earned herself a federal case file. The crisp autumn air suddenly tasted like victory. Brenda thought she was playing small-town politics. In reality, she just waltzed straight into a federal fraud probe. That afternoon, I took a slow drive through Millfield Estates, wanted to see firsthand what $50 million worth of cookie-cutter conformity looked like. The place was a monument to corporate monotony. 847 identical homes, each one stamped out like dough from the same architectural mold, lawns trimmed to HOA-approved precision. I parked my battered old pickup with its faded Vietnam veteran bumper sticker and rust that told 100 stories right in front of Brenda's house and took a leisurely look around. Her landscaping was manicured to psychotic perfection. That's when a neighbor approached, moving like a man navigating a minefield. Early 30s, pushing a stroller with one hand and clutching a coffee like it was liquid courage. "You're the judge with the barn, right?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder as if Brenda might rappel down from the roof. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez. Just wanted to thank you for standing up to her. She's been making our lives hell for 2 years." "What kind of hell, Marcus?" he sighed, exhausted. $80 fines if we leave our basketball hoop up after sunset. Violation notices for parking our work truck in the driveway. Apparently that ruins the neighborhood aesthetic. She even tried to fine us for $100 because our daughter drew hopscotch squares on the sidewalk. Washable chalk. The weariness in his voice said everything. Years of petty tyranny and intimidation. "You keeping records of these violations?" I asked. He laughed, brittle and sharp. "Judge, I've got enough of her letters to insulate my attic. My wife says we should frame them and call it modern art, the decline of the American dream." I handed him my business card. "Marcus, how'd you like to testify in federal court about discriminatory enforcement?" His face lit up like I'd offered him a winning lottery ticket. "Judge, I'd crawl through broken glass to testify against that woman. Half the neighborhood would throw a parade if someone finally took her down." As I drove home, I caught sight of Brenda's silhouette in her picture window, framed by custom shutters that probably cost more than a decent car. She thought she was gathering intel on her enemy. What she didn't realize was that she was watching a federal judge gather evidence against her. Brenda's third creative solution took the form of old-fashioned sabotage. It started with the power going out to 17 a.m. Tuesday night. Not unusual for rural Iowa, except it happened again Thursday. Then Saturday. Then every few days after that. Each time, the power company apologized for equipment failure or routine maintenance, yet somehow these mysterious malfunctions only affected my property. Then my water pressure began dropping to a trickle. The county blamed infrastructure issues, but Marcus called to let me know his water was flowing just fine. And then came Brenda's piece de resistance, an anonymous letter to the editor, printed in the Millfield Gazette. Signed only by a concerned neighbor, it painted me as a dangerous recluse, someone hoarding suspicious materials in his barn and showing increasingly erratic behavior toward the community. The smell of diesel exhaust from my backup generator mixed with the November chill as I read it over my morning coffee. Apparently, I was now a potential domestic terrorist for owning farm equipment and daring to tell an HOA president to pound sand. That afternoon, reviewing footage from my security cameras, I spotted something interesting. At 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes before one of the outages, a white Mercedes cruised slowly past my property line. The plate was crystal clear in the infrared. HOA 3N1 Brenda's vanity tag. She'd been out there in the middle of the night, scouting my land like a saboteur. But if she thought power outages and gossip could break me, she'd clearly never studied federal judges. We don't break. We build cases. I called Agent Kowalski. Sarah, our HOA queen just upgraded to infrastructure sabotage and character assassination. I've got video proof of surveillance, tampering, and now a smear campaign labeling me a threat. Perfect, she said, her tone almost cheerful. Judge, you're going to love this. We just got authorization for electronic surveillance on the Kilpatrick operation. Turns out your little barn fire is tied to a multi-county racketeering network. Municipal officials, developers, the works. The pieces were falling into place like a well-planned prosecution, while Brenda was busy playing amateur saboteur. The FBI was constructing a federal RICO case that would end her career and possibly her freedom. That evening, my phone started buzzing with calls from neighbors I'd never met. Word had spread through Millfield Estates that the old judge was fighting back, and suddenly everyone had a Brenda horror story to tell. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow from Maple Lane, told me Brenda fined her $200 for hanging laundry outside. Apparently clotheslines weren't compatible with community standards, though they weren't mentioned anywhere in the rules. Tom Patterson, a veteran from Oak Street, got ticketed every time he parked his motorcycle in his own driveway. Brenda claimed it was commercial equipment, though he rode it to work at the VA hospital. The pattern was undeniable. Brenda targeted anyone without the resources to resist: retirees, working families, veterans, anyone she thought she could bully into submission. My favorite call came from Jennifer Walsh, a single mom fined for having a non-regulation garden gnome in her yard. When she asked what rule it violated, Brenda said garden gnomes attracted the wrong element. Jennifer asked if she meant the gnomes or the people who liked them. Brenda's response, I'm told, wasn't fit for print. But the most unsettling call came from Marcus Rodriguez. Judge, he said quietly, there's something you need to know. Brenda cornered my wife at the grocery store yesterday, warning Maria that it would be a shame if my immigration status suddenly caught federal attention. My pulse spiked instantly. Marcus, are you a naturalized citizen? I asked. 2 decades ago, Judge, he said. The certificate's framed in my living room, but Brenda doesn't know that. She's counting on fear doing her dirty work. That threat crossed a line from harassment into outright criminal intimidation. Trying to use federal immigration powers against a U.S. citizen out of spite wasn't just unethical, it was a federal offense. That night, I sat in my den, logging every phone call, complaint, and example of discriminatory enforcement Brenda had unleashed on her neighbors. The filing cabinet was starting to resemble an FBI evidence archive because that's exactly what it was turning into. At 3:17 a.m., the smell of smoke tore me from sleep. I rushed to the window and saw an orange blaze where my grandfather's barn once stood. The same barn that had endured 70 Iowa winters, 3 generations of harvests, and the farm crisis of the 80s was now a roaring pyre. Standing there in my pajamas, watching decades of family history disintegrate, I felt something I hadn't in years: the cold, focused rage that comes before dismantling someone's entire world. Brenda Kilpatrick had just made the worst mistake of her life. Even as the firefighters battled the flames, I was already on the phone first, Agent Kowalski. She picked up on the second ring despite the early hour. Federal arson, veterans' heritage property, I said evenly. I've got motive footage and enough evidence of conspiracy to bury this operation for life. I'm on my way, she replied. Don't touch a thing. Don't talk to anyone except federal agents. And whatever you do, don't jeopardize the prosecution. Next, I called Michael Chen. Michael, they burned down my grandfather's barn. I want a civil rights lawsuit so airtight it bankrupts everyone involved down to their great-grandchildren, but it was the third call that changed everything. I reached out to my old colleague, Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd handled property law cases longer than I'd been alive. "Patty, I need clarity on agricultural exemptions and HOA authority," I said. "If someone wanted to force a sale of grandfathered farmland, how would they legally do it?" She paused. "Only to ways prove it's no longer used for agriculture or claim the exemption was fraudulent." Why? That's when it hit me like a freight train. I dove into county records, deeper than ever before, and what I found in the original HOA Incorporation papers made my hands shake with fury. Hidden in Section 47C was a clause giving the HOA first right of refusal on any non-conforming property within 2 miles at only 60% of market value. Every false violation, every nuisance complaint, every push to drive me off the land, it had all been part of a calculated scheme to force a cheap sale straight to Brenda's HOA. The real bombshell came in the financial disclosures buried at the county clerk's office. Brenda personally held $2.3 million in Heartland Development Corp. Stopped, the same company positioned to buy up all the farmland her HOA was targeting. She wasn't just a petty dictator drunk on authority, she was the head of a multi-million-dollar land fraud racket. Few homeowners realize their HOA documents can contain hidden property acquisition rights like this, clauses that allow boards to seize nearby land for well below value. Always read every covenant. The fine print can hide staggering power grabs. Digging further, I found the financial web ran even deeper. Rise Construction had secured 847 building permits for Millfield Estates plus contracts for every road, power line, and sewer. The total exceeded $50 million. All funneled through entities Brenda owned or controlled. My 47 acres weren't just an eyesore to her, they were the missing piece of a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. With my land, they could add luxury homes, a retail strip, even a golf course. No wonder she'd resorted to arson. By dawn, I had built a case so comprehensive it could make Watergate look like a traffic ticket. When Agent Kowalski arrived at 7:15 a.m., I handed her a thick folder still warm from the printer. "Agent Kowalski," I said, standing among the smoldering ruins of my grandfather's barn, "I think it's time we discuss RICO charges." The smell of burned oak mingled with the morning air. For the first time since this war began, I smiled. Brenda thought torching my barn would break me. Instead, she'd handed me the blueprint to her own destruction. By 8 a.m., my dining room had become a federal command center. Kowalski and 2 other agents filled the room with evidence boxes and the aroma of fresh coffee. Outside, the scent of charred wood drifted in, a reminder of everything at stake, and everything we were about to bring down. Agent Kowalski spread a stack of files across my grandmother's oak table. "Judge Brennan," she began, "what you've uncovered connects to our broader investigation in ways that are, frankly, remarkable. Brenda Kilpatrick isn't just pulling a local scam, she's the Iowa hub of a multi-state land fraud network." Agent Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed investigator from the Des Moines field office, pulled up a tablet filled with complex financial diagrams that looked like a spiderweb drawn by a paranoid mathematician. "We've traced the same patterns in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois," he explained. "HOA intimidation, municipal corruption, coerced property sales, and massive developer payoffs. It's the same playbook everywhere." Meanwhile, Agent Thompson was already unpacking surveillance gear. "Judge," he said, "we'd like authorization to wire your property. When Brenda makes her next move, and she will, we want every syllable admissible in federal court. While the FBI converted my farmhouse into a command post, I was drafting the legal strategy that would collapse Brenda's entire empire." Michael Chen drove down from Chicago with a legal team that looked ready to prosecute war criminals, and my former clerk, Sarah Martinez, flew in from Denver, bringing her expertise in municipal corruption cases. "That," Michael said after reviewing the mountain of evidence, "this is the most comprehensive civil rights violation case I've seen in 15 years. We're looking at systematic targeting of protected groups, abuse of public resources, and organized fraud. It's a prosecutor's dream. Under federal RICO statutes, any ongoing criminal enterprise can lose everything: assets, property, and profits, with victims entitled to triple damages." When criminals launder their schemes through legitimate organizations, prosecutors can strip them down to the studs. Community mobilization followed faster than I ever expected. Marcus Rodriguez arranged a quiet meeting in the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church. By Thursday night, 47 Millfield Estates residents gathered, each carrying their own documentation of Brenda's abuses. Mrs. Chen arrived with a showbox full of absurd violation notices. Tom Patterson had photos of Brenda's enforcers literally measuring his lawn with rulers. Jennifer Walsh brought recordings of phone calls where Brenda threatened to involve child services over unacceptable yard conditions. Judge Marcus said to the room, "We've lived under her thumb for years. Some of us stopped flying flags on Veterans Day because she claimed they were politically divisive. She's turned us into prisoners in our own homes." The documentation revealed the staggering scope of her reign. In just 3 years, Brenda had issued 1,247 violation notices to 187 families. The average fine was $312, but the real cost was psychological. Families were selling and fleeing rather than endure her relentless harassment. My favorite piece of evidence came from Bob Hendress, a retired postal worker. Brenda fined him for displaying a non-regulation American flag. When he asked what rule prohibited it, she replied that flags must be proportionally appropriate to community aesthetics. So Bob installed a 30-foot flagpole in his backyard and hoisted a flag the size of a bedsheet, perfectly legal and beautifully petty. While the FBI built their criminal case and Michael refined our civil suit, I focused on the crown jewel, a sweeping federal complaint that would expose the entire corruption network for the nation to see. Tom Brennan, no relation, ran the Millfield Gazette and jumped at the opportunity. "Judge, this is Pulitzer-level stuff," he said. "A federal judge exposing municipal corruption in his own backyard. It's going national. Public attention was our best protection. The more eyes on Brenda, the harder it would be for her to destroy evidence or silence witnesses." Tom coordinated with the Des Moines Register, and by Friday afternoon, reporters from 3 major outlets were requesting interviews. Meanwhile, Agent Kowalski's team analyzed the security footage from the night of the barn fire. The findings were damning. Between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m., 3 vehicles were recorded near my property, Brenda's Mercedes and 2 trucks registered to Rise Construction. Judge Kowalski said, turning her laptop toward me, "We've got them cold. Vehicle IDs, cell tower pings, and accelerant residue. This isn't just arson, it's a potential domestic terrorism case." By Sunday evening, our combined legal and investigative teams had gathered enough evidence to topple a small government. The plan was beautifully simple: use the next whole meeting to publicly unveil Brenda's crimes, with federal agents on site for immediate arrests and journalists there to capture every second. "Brenda thinks she's been playing chess," I told the room as we finalized the operation. "What she doesn't realize is that we've been playing federal prosecution and she's already in checkmate." The faint sound of my grandfather's wind chimes mingled with the autumn air. I could almost feel Seamus nodding in approval. This wasn't just about avenging a barn anymore, it was about freeing an entire community from a predator who'd thrived on their fear. Brenda's desperation surfaced 3 days before the whole meeting, wrapped in a proposal so brazen I almost respected the audacity. She appeared at my doorstep at exactly 10 o'clock a.m. Tuesday morning, flanked by County Commissioner Dale Fitzpatrick, a man whose suit looked ready to burst at the seams. "Mr. Brennan," Brenda began, her voice heavy with false concern, "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Dale and I are here to discuss a resolution that could benefit everyone." I invited them into the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the lingering hint of charred wood drifting through the open window. What they didn't know was that Agent Kowalski's team had wired every inch of the house. Every word was being recorded in pristine digital clarity. Commissioner Fitzpatrick eased himself into my grandfather's old chair and got straight to business. "Judge, we understand you've experienced some recent property damage. The county wants to make things right." Brenda opened her briefcase with surgical precision, pulling out a set of documents that made my eyebrows rise. "Mr. Brennan," she said smoothly, "we're prepared to offer you $400,000 for your property cash, 30-day closing, no inspections or contingencies, $400,000 for land worth at least $1 to million. They weren't even pretending it wasn't extortion. How generous, I replied evenly, my phone app quietly capturing every word. But I'm not interested in selling. Fitzpatrick leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Judge, between us, there might be some administrative complications if this property dispute continues. Tax assessments, environmental reviews, infrastructure compliance, those expenses can pile up fast. Brenda nodded in false sympathy. What Dale means, she said smoothly, is that we can make your legal troubles disappear. The federal case, the insurance mess from the fire, everything could be quietly resolved if we reach an understanding. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. They were openly proposing to obstruct federal justice in exchange for my land. And if I decide not to take this generous offer? I asked, pouring another cup of coffee with a hand that stayed rock steady despite my racing pulse. Fitzpatrick smiled, a cold, hollow expression with all the warmth of a January blizzard. Judge, the county has plenty of tools at its disposal. Building inspections, septic evaluations, tax audits. Those processes can be extremely thorough when public safety becomes a concern. I let them ramble on for another 20 minutes, capturing every veiled threat, every bribe attempt, every abuse of authority. They practically mapped out their entire corruption network, as if giving a PowerPoint presentation naming which county officials were complicit and how certain federal investigators could be steered. Of course, with the right political leverage. The highlight came when Brenda insisted that my uncooperative attitude was hurting local property values and that selling my land would be my patriotic duty to support economic growth. Apparently, surrendering your family farm to corrupt officials had become an act of civic virtue. Once they left, I called Agent Kowalski right away. Sarah, I just recorded a sitting county commissioner offering to obstruct federal justice and a HOA president trying to bribe a federal witness. Please tell me you caught all of it. Every beautiful word, Judge, she replied. We've got enough to charge them with conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. That coffee meeting just became the centerpiece of our federal case, but Brenda wasn't finished with her desperate tactics. Later that afternoon, Marcus Rodriguez called me, his voice shaking. Judge, they're escalating. Brenda just got my wife fired from the county hospital. They're calling it budget cuts, but Maria was the only one laid off and she just received a performance bonus. The retaliation against my supporters grew ruthless. Mrs. Chan was suddenly informed her property taxes were being reassessed for potential overvaluation. Tom Patterson got a noise violation for his motorcycle even though it hadn't been started in 3 days. Jennifer Walsh reported that social services showed up at her home after an anonymous tip questioning her parenting. The investigator apologized immediately after seeing her spotless home and well-cared-for kids, admitting the complaint looked malicious. Federal witness intimidation carries severe penalties up to 20 years in prison for retaliating against someone aiding an investigation. Anyone facing that kind of retaliation should document every incident and report it immediately. In fact, witness intimidation charges often carry longer sentences than the original crimes themselves. That evening, the press started calling. Someone had leaked details of the federal probe, and suddenly my small-town HOA war was headline news across Iowa. Judge Brennan asked Katie Morrison from Channel 7 News, "Can you confirm your cooperation with a federal investigation into corruption in Millfield County?" The leak was no accident. Brenda was trying to seize control of the narrative, casting herself as the victim of government overreach and me as a bitter ex-judge weaponizing his influence. But her PR stunt blew up spectacularly. Instead of earning sympathy, she drew intense scrutiny into her finances and political ties. By Thursday morning, 3 major news outlets had launched investigations into HOA abuse statewide, and the state attorney general's office had opened its own inquiry into municipal corruption. Brenda had tried to bury me with threats and manipulation, but she'd accidentally triggered a media inferno that exposed her crimes to all of Iowa. The woman was digging her own grave with a federally issued shovel. Her final act of desperation came as a full-blown public relations blitz worthy of Joseph Goebbels himself. She hired Meridian Crisis Management, a Chicago firm notorious for scrubbing the reputations of disgraced politicians and CEOs. Within 48 hours, Millfield County was drowning in propaganda portraying me as an unstable retiree abusing federal contacts to torment honest community leaders. It was a masterclass in smear tactics. Anonymous social media accounts appeared overnight, spreading rumors that I'd been forced into retirement for cognitive decline and ethical violations. Local Facebook groups buzzed with posts claiming I was paranoid, obsessed, and possibly unfit for public life. Then came the most damaging attack: a leaked audio recording supposedly from a private judicial conference. The voice, eerily similar to mine, talked about freeing dangerous criminals on technicalities. The recording mixed authentic snippets from my sentencing hearings with fabricated lines engineered to destroy my reputation. But Brenda's arrogance proved fatal. She underestimated how much federal agents despise being deceived. At 6:23 a.m., Agent Kowalski called, her voice taut with fury. "Judge, that tape's faker than a $3 bill. We've identified at least 17 splice points, and the voice rhythm doesn't match your speech patterns. Whoever made this is looking at federal charges for fabricating evidence." The FBI's counterstrike was immediate and devastating. Within hours, they traced the doctored recording to a Des Moines media firm that specialized in political reputation management. Its client list read like a directory of Midwestern corruption, and the payment trail led directly to Kilpatrick Development Solutions. While Brenda was busy obliterating her own credibility with counterfeit evidence, I was cataloging every act of retaliation aimed at my allies. The harassment had reached absurd, almost vengeful extremes. Marcus Rodriguez suddenly found his immigration status under review by federal authorities, except the request came not from Washington, but from Commissioner Fitzpatrick's office. When ICE agents arrived, they were baffled to learn Marcus had been a naturalized U.S. citizen for 2 decades. Mrs. Chen received a notice declaring her 70-year-old home structurally unsafe and subject to immediate evacuation. The corruption machine was unraveling, and Brenda's empire was finally collapsing under its own deceit. The county inspector who signed that notice later confessed privately that he'd never even set foot on Mrs. Chen's property. He'd simply been instructed to find issues with anyone siding with the troublesome judge. Tom Patterson didn't fare much better. He was arrested in his own driveway for public intoxication despite being stone-cold sober. The officer responsible, Deputy Kevin Wass, later told his sergeant that he'd been ordered to find a reason to arrest Patterson, even though the man hadn't touched alcohol in over 15 years. My personal favorite came when they tried to have me arrested for agricultural terrorism. According to the complaint, I was allegedly sheltering dangerous livestock in my non-existent barn. The county animal control officer arrived, warrant in hand, ready to confiscate my supposed militant poultry. What he found instead was a total absence of chickens, aggressive or otherwise. When he asked who'd filed the report, his supervisor simply shrugged and said it came from reliable community sources. Ironically, this wave of retaliation had an unintended effect. It created dozens of new federal witnesses. Every abuse of authority, every fabricated inspection, every misuse of county power for personal vengeance added another victim willing to testify. Under federal law, conspiracy charges apply to anyone who participates in a criminal operation, even if they weren't part of the original scheme. Public officials who misuse their authority to assist criminal enterprises automatically become conspirators and face the same severe penalties as the ringleaders. Agent Kowalski's investigation now encompassed 12 county officials, 6 business owners, and what appeared to be an elaborate web of municipal corruption spanning 3 congressional districts. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors were seriously considering RICO charges, ones that could lock up the entire network for decades. The breaking point came when Brenda attempted to have me declared mentally unfit. She filed a petition claiming I was a danger to myself and others, accusing me of paranoid delusions about imaginary federal conspiracies and hostile behavior towards civic leaders. The medical certification came from Dr. Gerald Hoffman, none other than Commissioner Fitzpatrick's brother, who alleged he had evaluated my deteriorating mental state, despite never having met me. the judge who signed the involuntary commitment order. Timothy Fitzpatrick Dale's nephew. The nepotism was so blatant it would have been hilarious if it weren't so dangerous. When Deputy Walsh arrived at my doorstep with the commitment papers, he was greeted by Agent Kowalski's surveillance team recording every second. Realizing what he'd walked into, the deputy quietly admitted he was just following orders. "Son," I told him, "you might want to start documenting those orders carefully. The FBI tends to prosecute people who obey illegal commands." That evening, Agent Kowalski called with the news I'd been waiting for. "Judge," she said, "we've got enough to bring down the whole operation. Grand jury indictments are being finalized for 14 defendants, including our dear friend Brenda. The U.S. Attorney wants maximum media exposure for the arrests." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night," she replied. "At the whole meeting. We're ending this in public with everyone watching." The crisp scent of autumn drifted through my open window as I hung up. Justice was finally coming due. Brenda had spent months trying to ruin me with intimidation and lies. Tomorrow night, she'd learn what happens when you pick a fight with a federal judge who spent 27 years perfecting the art of legal warfare. The Millfield Community Center had never seen such a crowd. Over 430 people packed into a room built for 200, with others pressed against windows or watching the live stream spreading rapidly across social media. The air was thick with tension, murmurs, and the faint metallic scent of too many bodies into small a space. I arrived at exactly 7 p.m., carrying my grandfather's charred hammer sealed in a clear evidence bag. The symbolism was deliberate. Sometimes justice requires no subtlety. Agent Kowalski and her team were scattered throughout the audience, disguised as residents but connected through discreet earpieces. Brenda opened the meeting with the poise of someone who still thought she held control. Wearing a navy Armani suit that probably cost more than a month's mortgage, she smiled like a politician on election night. "Before we begin tonight's agenda," she said, her tone sharp and self-assured, "I'd like to address the harassment campaign being waged against your whole leadership by certain individuals who refuse to respect community standards." The room stirred, but not with the support she expected. People whispered, glanced at their phones, exchanged wary looks. News of the federal investigation had spread. The crowd was ready. "Mrs. Kilpatrick," I said, standing near the back, "I'd like to address the community about those harassment claims." Her color drained under her foundation, but she forced a smile. "Mr. Brennan, you'll have your turn during the public comment period." "Actually," came a clear voice from the front, "Mr. Brennan may speak now." Agent Kowalski rose from her chair. "FBI Special Agent Sarah Kowalski, and this meeting is now a federal evidence-gathering session." The room erupted. Phones appeared, reporters surged forward, and Brenda's expression flickered from shock to fury to naked panic. Commissioner Fitzpatrick tried to slip out, only to find his way blocked by Agent Rodriguez. I walked to the podium carrying my laptop and a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. The crowd fell silent as I set my grandfather's hammer on the podium, the thud echoing like a gavel through the room. "My name is Federal Judge Thaddeus Brennan, retired," I began. 3 months ago, Brenda Kilpatrick began a calculated campaign to force me off my family's land through harassment, intimidation, and finally arson. What she didn't realize was that every move she made built a stronger federal case against her. I opened my laptop and projected the evidence: bank transfers, shell companies, kickback ledgers, a financial spiderweb linking Brenda to a multi-million-dollar land fraud ring operating across 6 counties. "For over 18 months, I continued, Mrs. Kilpatrick and her associates have weaponized county resources to target seniors, veterans, and minority homeowners, forcing them to sell their properties below market value to companies she secretly controlled. Under federal RICO statutes, all assets tied to a criminal enterprise can be seized: bank accounts, vehicles, real estate, everything." Brenda finally snapped, shouting, "This is outrageous. Murdoch Brennan is a disturbed man who's been stalking and harassing community leaders for months. These accusations are the ramblings of someone who clearly needs psychiatric help." That's when I played the recording, her own voice echoing through the speakers, clear and undeniable. "We have the ability to make your legal problems disappear. That federal lawsuit, the insurance claims from the fire, all of that could be resolved quietly if we reach an understanding. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the sound of people breathing. Mrs. Kilpatrick, I said, meeting her eyes, you made one fatal mistake. You assumed a retired federal judge wouldn't know how to build a criminal case. Agent Kowalski stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her jacket. You were wrong, Brenda Kilpatrick. You're under arrest for conspiracy, mail and wire fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under color of law. The crowd erupted as Brenda's carefully crafted empire crumbled before everyone's eyes. Cameras flashed, cheers filled the air, and amid the uproar, I heard Mrs. Jen shout, finally, her voice carrying decades of pent-up satisfaction. As Agent Kowalski read Brenda her rights, I leaned toward the microphone for one final word. Mrs. Kilpatrick, you once said there were creative ways to handle community problems. You were right, though I doubt a federal prison cell was the solution you imagined. Commissioner Fitzpatrick made a desperate dash for the exit, but Agent Thompson intercepted him at the fire door. Meanwhile, Deputy Walsh, who had decided that 20 years in federal prison wasn't worth protecting corrupt superiors, was already giving his statement to Agent Rodriguez. The community center had transformed into a live crime scene, breaking news event, and a collective act of emotional release. As federal agents escorted Brenda out in cuffs, the crowd's applause filled the air not with hatred, but with the sheer relief of people finally freed from tyranny. Tears streamed down Marcus Rodriguez's face as he stood. Judge, you gave us our community back, he said. The crisp autumn breeze drifted through the open doors, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of long-awaited justice. Brenda Kilpatrick's rule of intimidation had ended, and Millfield Estates was finally free. 6 months later, I stood where my grandfather's barn once burned, watching volunteers raise the frame for its replacement. The morning air smelled of fresh oak, and the rhythm of hammers echoed like a song from 70 years past, the same sounds Seamus once heard. Brenda Kilpatrick was now serving a 12-year sentence in federal prison after pleading guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights abuses. Prosecutors had threatened her with RICO charges that could have meant life. So she took the deal. Her $2.1 million restitution fund was already being used to improve communities across Millfield County. Commissioner Fitzpatrick received 8 years for his role, and Deputy Walsh, in exchange for his cooperation, got probation. The entire Kilpatrick corruption machine collapsed like a rotted structure, dragging down 14 officials and business owners who once believed themselves beyond reach. The sweetest irony was watching Randy Kilpatrick's construction company lose every county contract. The man who'd built his fortune on bribes and kickbacks was now begging for small repair jobs and sidewalk projects. Justice, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. Under the leadership of Marcus Rodriguez, the new HOA board introduced sweeping reforms that soon became a model across Iowa: term limits, transparent finances, open meetings, and an independent ombudsman to investigate complaints. The age of petty dictators was gone, replaced by genuine democracy. Mrs. Chen became the neighborhood's unofficial historian, documenting every abuse from the Kilpatrick years to make sure the past was never repeated. We were so afraid, she told me during the barn raising, afraid to park our cars, to hang laundry, to live freely in our own homes. You gave us the courage to fight back. The new barn was more than a structure, it was a monument to resilience. Amish craftsmen offered their skill, veterans supplied materials, and families from across Millfield Estates came together to rebuild. What started as one man's battle for justice had grown into a community's declaration of independence. Under federal civil rights law, victims of government abuse can recover attorney fees and punitive damages, often in the millions. When officials violate constitutional rights, they can be sued personally and held financially accountable. From that same barn, I opened a small legal clinic to help rural families fight HOA corruption and municipal abuse. In our first year alone, we handled over 200 cases with a success rate that surpassed my old prosecution record. There were plenty of Brendas out there, but none of them could stand up to organized resistance. Agent Kowalski's task force had expanded across 12 states and covering a nationwide development fraud network targeting rural towns. The Kilpatrick investigation became the federal model for dismantling local corruption through teamwork between agents and victims. The annual Seamus Brennan Heritage Festival soon became the county's biggest celebration, a tribute to agriculture, family, and community spirit. Farmers displayed vintage equipment, families shared traditional dishes, and children learned about the immigrant hands that built Iowa's fields. At the festival's heart was a scholarship program for agricultural students, funded entirely by assets seized from Brenda's forfeited estate. Each year, 20 scholarships went to young people determined to carry on the farming traditions that built America's heartland. As the sun dipped behind the newly raised barn, its golden light stretching across fields ready for planting, I felt something I hadn't in years of peace. The land Seamus once claimed with blood, sweat, and honor was finally secure for future generations. My phone buzzed with a message from Tom Morrison at the Millfield Gazette. Judge got a lead on an HOA president in Cedar Rapids trying to foreclose on a veteran's home for flying the American flag. Interested? I smiled as I typed my reply. Send me the details. Some lessons are never learned. The fight for justice doesn't end, it just moves to new battlegrounds. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. I had allies, a rebuilt barn full of legal firepower, and the satisfaction of knowing predators like Brenda Kilpatrick would think twice before targeting small-town families again. If you've lived through your own HOA horror story,